You're a teacher? Part-time. I'm Liam, this is Rob, and welcome to the Yikes podcast. With the Dial of Destiny now in cinemas, it seems as good a time as any to complete our look back at the Indiana Jones saga with 2008's much and somewhat unfairly maligned Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, a movie that, despite its reputation, I would argue is actually much better than many would have you believe, even if it is the ultimate movie of two halves. Now, I say that, but I appreciate that Rob might have a very different opinion, like most folk, when it comes to Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. It's a movie I've always defended in part, but I appreciate, this might be the hill that I die on alone. Put it that way.
I think you made it. It's not as good. It's not as good as most people believe, as you just said. It's better. Yeah, and not as bad as most people believe. Mm-hmm. It's bad, dude. I mean, to be fair, there are certain things that look like it's going to save it, and I'll go straight into it. The opening. Right up until, and we'll get to the fridge. Right up until the fridge.
Oh, we will.
The opening is great. To be fair, I remember watching that part in the cinema, and you start getting the old Indy feels from the part he picks up the hat, and then Indy's talking, and you got all these soldiers just around him and things, and pointing guns at him, and it's great. But after rewatching it, I never actually questioned, right? And yes, I'm going straight into questions. This thing that they're looking for, before we know it's a magnetic skull, he says it's magnetic. So is it only magnetic to gunpowder until they open it? Because none of their guns seem to be having trouble with it. None of their bullets seem to be having trouble with it. None of their metal, whatever they're carrying, have trouble with it. Right up until the point they find it. Then as they start moving it, then their guns start going closer to it, and her sword gets erect. Which it's
a weight thing I'm putting it down to, and that's why he makes sure it's gunpowder. So I assume the closer you get, the more powerful it is. But the gunpowder is so light that if you throw it in the air, it just kind of vaguely goes towards it. But at a distance, it's not strong enough to pull the weapons
towards it. As soon as you throw the gunpowder in the air, it goes, oh, this way.
Yeah. Don't get me wrong, it's silly, and a lot of this film, don't get me wrong, and this will come back in the fridge scene. A lot of this film is vaguely silly, but when I'm watching the opening, and my big argument with this film is, and I mentioned it in the intro, is that it's the ultimate film of two halves. I think the first half of this film, basically right up until they get to Brazil, when the wheels fall off, and going into this film, I've always said, I've mentioned on numerous podcasts, that I think the first half is really good. Now, I actually, rewatching it, I feel more strongly about both sides of the film. So I actually think the first half is even better than I remember. I think the first half of this film, basically everything up until Brazil, sits comfortably alongside the original trilogy. I think it's legitimately that good. And a big part of that is I quite like the nuke the fridge scene. But everything from Brazil, and I won't say everything when they get to the Amazon, because I actually think the scene in the tent is actually okay, and we'll get to that in a bit. But certainly once you get to the chase sequence with the truck, everything after that is bad. And I mean bad.
Here's my question, right?
Yeah.
You like the fridge scene, but you're ardently against Shia LaBeouf swinging on vines.
Terrible. I hate it.
But I don't understand it. Have you ever?
It's just not. It's right. I know what you mean. Right. The suspension for disbelief is ludicrous in both examples. I totally get that. Right. Whether it be him swinging from the trees, that actually might be slightly more realistic than Indy surviving the fridge thing.
That's what I want to ask. Have you ever had to move a fridge?
Yes, I have. Yes.
Every time I have to move a fridge, and because I say every time, my dad used to actually fix them. So we had a company where he fixed them. So we had to move fridges.
I'm glad you explained that, because in my life I've had to move a fridge once. How many times moving fridges?
Growing up, dude, I've had to move a lot of fridges because my dad had to.
So your suspension of disbelief might be somewhat
where you would fix them. Every time I've had to move a fridge, that door has swung open on me. Now you're telling me Indy must have the grip of 9,000 men?
Again, see, this is a classic Rob thing about going after the strangest fucking thing about that scene.
That
It's like,
thing would open up.
I don't think anyone else, other than you, and maybe the internet will tell me differently, I don't think anyone, when they watch the nuke the fridge sequence, is like, oh, that door would open up. I just don't think anyone's looked at it and said, that's the problem. That is a uniquely Rob problem. Like, oh, dude, the door would open. Nobody's thinking that. They're thinking, wait, how would he survive? How does he just roll out and he's fine? Why would it fly that far? Nobody's like, the door would open, dude.
Because he shouldn't be there when it landed, because the door would have opened up and he would have melted.
I give you that. Well, to bring it back, why I like that scene, and maybe like I have issues with what happens later in the film, is that the scene around it is just so much. It's so poorly constructed. It's like that. And it all comes back. A lot of the issues with this film comes back to Spielberg, actually, and both for good and bad. So basically, because Spielberg didn't want to be away from his family, he wanted to shoot everything in the US. And fuck me, it shows. One of the things you notice is a lot of the first half of this movie is shot in the US, on location in the US, and it looks fantastic. The second half is all CG, and it's got that weird mid-2000s digital gleam. They've actually toned that down for the recent 4K release, so the film actually looks better now than it ever has, because it really had that kind of bloom effect, which was so prevalent, not only in mid-2000 films, but especially Spielberg films. If you go back and watch, say, Minority Report, everything's got this weird bloom, which I'm not the biggest fan of. But basically, when they go to the Amazon, all of a sudden, everything's on a set, everything's CG. And the scene, basically, too many things happen in too short a period in that sequence in the Amazon. And we are jumping ahead now, but we're here. What can you do? So you have him swinging from the trees, which is all CG heavy. Then it goes directly into that terrible fencing sequence, which also looks terrible because, again, over-reliance on CG.
No, I didn't mind
then
that sequence.
Oh, dude, I
didn't mind it.
I hate to see, because if they did that, like legit on location, I think it might have worked, but because there's that over-reliance on CG, I really disliked it. And then you have Marion, with all the confidence in the world, says, no, it's fine. I'm going to drive off this cliff onto a tree. This is going to work. And then it immediately goes into the 3 drops, which would obviously kill anyone. And I think any one of them on their own, I might have been able to deal with, but it's like bad choice after bad choice after bad choice. And I'm just like, that whole sequence really does feel rough. And as I said, visually, because there's that reliance on CG, doesn't work for me in a way that the opening sequence does.
Yeah, but you're doing this right. You're arguing this point against 60-year-old Indiana Jones being able to escape a Russian military company, right? Survive a fall into a test center for a supersonic sleigh, right? Be able to do that supersonic sleigh, get up, be a bit dizzy but not puke, run into a town, survive a nuclear blast in a fridge, only have a little bit of radiation clean down, and then go back to work. So
I appreciate that's mental.
3 things after, but you can suspend disbelief because the CG looks a bit ropey. But you're okay with the beginning of that. Now I'm saying the beginning is classic Indy. I do get that, but I can't see the difference.
Well, I was thinking about this. It's like, why am I more accepting of those sequences? Or more specifically, and this goes to nuke the fridge, because I can understand why people have a problem with that, because there's still the CG elements, and I'll go into why I defend that sequence and why I like it so much in a moment. But I was like, well, why do people have an issue with the nuke the fridge sequence? Or why do I have such an issue with the car sequence or the going off the cliff sequence? But we're much more accepting of, say, jumping out of a plane in a dinghy in Temple of Doom and surviving that. And basically what I've come down to is, to bring it back to my initial point, is CG. So even though you can see it's dummies where the boat comes out of the plane, what your brain is actually seeing is like, yeah, they're dummies, but you see the boat come out of the plane, literally,
it's practical,
it's practical, and you see it land on the water. And even though you can see the dummies, you know it's dummies, you're like, well, wait a minute, if you threw that out the plane and it's landed on the water, my brain's going, it might work. It might. Whereas with the CG, and I can see so clearly it's CG, I'm like, well, this is nonsense. It just doesn't work. And it's a big problem with the Dial of Destiny as well. It's one of the reasons I actually prefer this movie to the Dial of Destiny, which I watched recently, which we'll go into in great detail. I've seen it. That movie has a better screenplay, and I can't wait to see what you think about the third act of that film. It's fucking crazy. But what it doesn't have is that Spielberg magic, which gets you through so much in this film. Like, James Mangold's a perfectly decent director, but I know it's what a crime. What he isn't is Steven Spielberg. And because I literally watched Dial of Destiny, and the next day I watched this. And you just see, like, Spielberg has that ability. He always knows where to put the camera. He knows where to move it. And by comparison, his action sequences are just unfussy, but still spectacular. Whereas you watch a James Mangold film, and like so many modern blockbusters, the camera's moving all over the place. Everything feels busy, and it's hard to get like a judgment on what's exactly going on. And you especially see that in the opening sequence, beyond the uncanny valley thing, which I couldn't get past. It's a spectacular sequence, but there's too much going on, and it's too busy. Whereas there's this like minimalism to Spielberg's direction, where you're like, I know where everything is, and you really see that in the opening sequence.
But I argue, do you have to move the camera a lot? Because otherwise you're concentrating on an action sequence of 80-year-old Harrison Ford, and you suffer from then The Irishman, where you're meant to have young Robert. Yeah, you're meant to have young Robert De Niro kicking shit out of a guy on a street corner, and the Duke can barely move his knee. So you've got to do the camera thing, because Harrison Ford, he can move a bit easier in this, to be fair, but you can still see he's struggling. Like when he's climbing, and to be fair, I'm 40 years of age. I'm still going to struggle climbing to the top of anything. But he really struggles, even in this, climbing to the top of anything.
I think he's at, like, because he's 64 when he's filming this, but I think like Indy's at this point, because they're obviously consistent with the timeline, I think he's supposed to be like 55. And one, I totally buy him as a 55-year-old man. Two, it's like he's in good enough shape, I think, in this film to pull it off. But one of the big differences with this and, say, again, the Dial of Destiny or more modern blockbusters is they have this emphasis on using CG faces for, like, to put, like, all right, we've got a stuntman doing the scene, and we'll put the CG on, and it immediately takes me out of the scene. Whereas you watch the opening sequence of this, and one, Harrison Ford is still doing 90% of his stunts, and I think he looks fantastic in this film. I still buy him in this film. But for the sequences which he can't do, all they do is a clever use of shadow, tilt the camera. So you know it's probably not him, but your brain doesn't have to deal with it like you have to with modern films. And again, I think it's so much better. But it's like, I think great moments. I think, like I said, the first half of this movie is brilliant, but people all got caught up on like particular moments. Like right to the start of this film, everyone remembers how rough the gopher was. I assume you agree. The gopher,
it looked awful. Yeah,
it looks awful, and people were still thinking about that and not paying attention to how confident the opening sequence was. Otherwise, it goes straight into Hound Dog with Elvis, with the kids in the 50s cars. It puts you immediately in that place, in that B-movie aesthetic. And I'm like, this is fucking fantastic. Then it goes straight into Indy with the Russians, and I think that's a fantastic sequence. And I actually forgot that the nuke the fridge sequence is still part of the intro. It goes directly from the kids like having the chase with the soldiers, directly into the warehouse with the Russians, directly into the aforementioned speed. I don't even know what it was, where they have a fight out in the wilderness or whatever. They get shot off on that machine. I don't even know what it is. And then it goes directly into Harrison Ford finding himself at the bomb site.
Yeah.
And
that's they're testing engines, aren't they? They're testing jet engines.
Testing engines, that's it. Yeah. And that will bring us to the nuke the fridge sequence, of course.
But before we do that,
how?
Because you talked about that when the chase with the Russians, and I did like that part with Ray Winston where he's in the car and he's going, "Easy, Boris, you don't know him. You don't know him. You don't know him."
Yeah, that's brilliant.
But how did Ray Winston survive that crash?
Yeah, he should have been in a bit of mischief. He just walked away from that one.
Yes.
You get a lot of that in Indy films.
But that was because that was clear. There's no airbags. They're 50s cars. That was clear. The only way you're going to see Ray Winston again is when they pull his face off the grill of that truck.
It's a good point. And I think the bigger question is, would it have mattered if Ray Winston died in that crash?
No, because what's the point in Shia LaBeouf? And I know you're going to argue against that, but yeah, what's the point in Ray Winston? Like, all of a sudden, the guy's saying, "Oh, we've done missions together. Oh, yeah, I'm a secret. I'm a double agent. I'm a triple agent. Whatever." It was like, "Oh, we can't get Salah back, so we'll get this guy."
Yeah, all I can think is basically I don't think the character was maybe there at the start. I think he's one of these, and you get it in a lot of films. He's essentially a plot device. Basically, they're writing the script, and they get to situations where they can't. Like, well, how do the Russians know where Indy is? How do we get them back in the same place? and you need Ray Winston to be working for them, to be dropping the tags and stuff. So basically, he allows the chase to continue throughout the film without having to explain anything about how they're basically keeping up with Indiana Jones. They're just like, oh well, Ray Winston's telling them, and that's it. And I suspect that's the only reason he's there, because he's not a fantastic character, and narratively, like, in terms of plot, he's required, but narratively, he's not required.
So he was pointless. I mean, they did John Hurt dirty in this film, to be fair. Yeah. And the one they and you're going to say this is classic Rob, the one I was really upset with was the most was Andrew Divoff as Russian soldier.
Yes, that's a Rob one, okay, that's for sure.
Bless him. This dude was Wishmaster. This dude has been in everything, right? I love Andrew Divoff, and he's just in the background as a smiling Russian soldier. It's for someone like Andrew Divoff, I mean, it's not a bad place to be, is it? I know you probably prefer him pushed a little bit more front and center, but you're still a Russian soldier in an Indiana Jones movie. He's probably like, this is still pretty fucking cool. But then you're in the Crystal Skull movie, which...
Well, like I said, I think it's one of those films, like, obviously, what happens, and you get it a lot with the way people critique modern films, you know, and I know you disagree with me on a lot of these things, but people get caught up on moments they don't like, a la the Mary Poppins sequence in Rise of Skywalker, or the neck-break in Man of Steel, and they ignore the fact that, you know, those moments don't work. Or, you know, I actually like the neck break. I know that sounds weird, but I think the neck break in Man of Steel does work.
Yeah, no, I'm not a huge fan of Man of Steel, but I don't see why people are just going on about that.
But you know what, it's like the internet latches onto something. And I understand it with this film, because there are things, for all my support for this film, there are things that don't work. And I understand it. And even though I'm in a moment going to defend the nuke the fridging, I understand and appreciate why other people wouldn't be on board. But it's like they're then blinded to the rest of the film. As I mentioned with the intro, it's like you see the gopher and you're like, oh, that fucking gopher is shit. And then it's like they're not paying attention to the fact that the next 20, 30 minutes are actually brilliant. And before they can even start paying attention to it, they're like, the nuke the fridge sequence comes up. And I think one of the biggest problems with this film is that it ends poorly. I think if it's in the other way around, if it starts a bit whatever, but like I actually thought Dial of Destiny was maybe the other way around. For 20 minutes, I was like, I'm not sure about this. But it gets better in the second half. Whereas this is the opposite. And it's always the problem. If a film ends poorly, that's what you remember primarily, isn't it? When you walk out.
Don't worry, we'll get to
we will get to the end.
Let's get the nuclear fridge scene out of the way, and let's get the reason why you're wrong about defending this scene.
Like I said, I totally understand why people have strong feelings about this sequence, but I think it's so brilliantly put together. As I said, I didn't even realize when I went back to it that it's just part of the intro still. I suspect that they worked backwards from the imagery with the payoff, which I think is a big part of it, because like having Indiana Jones's silhouette, you know, alongside a nuclear explosion is a spectacular payoff. So I'm willing to go that extra mile because I think the payoff's so impressive. But I think the build-up for it, like, it's so classic Ford when he shows up in the town, and his physical comedy in that sequence when he's falling over things and he's like, what the fuck is going on? He's like, and then he realizes what's happening. He's like, oh, that's not good. And it's like, I love that part of the sequence. I think Harrison Ford is on peak form there. Then I think people forget just how impressive the actual nuclear explosion is when it destroys the town. It looks amazing. It's one of the best I think I've seen on screen. Yes, I then appreciate that the big issue, other than the door not opening, is the fridge flying over, the CG roll, and him just rolling out. I understand why that's a problem, but as I said, I think it's offset by that scene where I think it's worth it, where you see the Indy silhouette, you see the huge mushroom cloud, which looks amazing. I'm like, I love that imagery, and that's why I'm willing to go to bat for that sequence.
You said a lot of things that I can agree with, the way it looks, but you cannot take away the fact, even if I've already said Indy had the grip of 10,000 men to keep that door shut, right?
Yeah.
He's not getting, as a 55-year-old man, he's not getting out without at least a broken toe.
No, I appreciate, like, that's the big, but you can't have Indy breaking his toe. I suppose. That is, and the suspension of disbelief is massive.
Yeah,
there's no two ways about it. But the difference between this and, as I said, later on in the film, where I think there are massive suspensions of disbelief required, is that this sequence is just better put together.
It's really weird,
better constructed. The payoff's much better. So I'm willing myself to do it because I like everything else about it. So I totally agree with you. He should be in bits. He should just be he should just roll out. Oh, dead. He's dead.
But I'll agree with you, right? Because it's really weird, right? that you're willing to go the suspension of disbelief, as you've said, for this, and for some reason I can't. But then you look at a film like The Wraith, where it's about a guy that comes back from the dead, changes his face a little bit, has a super space car. Apparently everyone knows that the coppers can't do anything about this weird 45-year-old man who's meant to be 20 terrorizing the town.
Yeah. You
suspend disbelief for that film, fine. But I can, for some reason, just think, you know what, maybe he can't survive in a fridge because they concentrated too long on the fact that the fridge said lead lined.
They had to do that though, didn't they? But I know what you mean. But the thing is, I guess with Indiana Jones, especially by this point, because we're going into the fourth film, is that whether you've kind of listed them in your head or not, the world has been established in terms of what you think Indiana Jones should be able to survive in terms of previous films. And as I said, this really does. Like, again, people forget how far they've pushed the limits with previous films just because the scenes are better, more successfully constructed. I mentioned earlier the boat going out of the plane. It's dumb as a bag of hammers, but because it's physical and because the scene is so great, you're willing to go with it. Now, for a lot of people, this was a step too far, and I totally understand it. And for me personally, the second half was a step too far with all those sequences with the trees and stuff, because I didn't think the payoff was good enough. So I don't want to make that suspension of disbelief because I don't think it's worth it because the scene's not good enough. But here, I'm willing to do it because I think everything other than the fridge bit, which I know is a massive part of it, is spectacular. And as I said, it's not just, that's all part of the opening. And I think it's such a strong, such a confident opening. And then it stays good. Like the scene in, it's actually shot in Yale, but it's is it Marshall College? That's because it's fictional, isn't it? But it was shot at Yale. Is again spectacular. I actually really like the nod to Marlon Brando's Wild Ones with Mutt at the start. I like the intro. I think that whole sequence looks amazing. This is where the chase sequence is brilliant.
This is what all that is good. It just it gets let down. I don't think he's a good actor.
I think he's a really good actor. I think I'll meet you halfway. I think he's miscast here. I'm not buying into the idea that he's a bad actor. I mean, like, let's be clear. He hasn't got matinee good looks. Obviously, these directors are seeing something in him. It's like Spielberg, kind of David Ayer. Even Oliver Stone brought him in for Wall Street 2. They're obviously seeing something in this kid. And people saw it long before. Like, I remember like movies like Holes and stuff back in the day. And when they got him in for Constantine as the, support character.
Yeah, it's Chaz.
Chaz, he was clearly outlined as like, all right, this kid's got something special. And I genuinely think he is a very good actor, but he's not great in this role. I think he's miscast, despite the fact that I would argue his chemistry with Ford is actually pretty decent in this film. I don't think he's as bad as people have suggested. But
I don't know. Again, I don't know whether it was the way he was delivering his lines or trying to act tough, and I just couldn't see it. But I took an instant dislike to him. In
that's I think the big issue with him. Like, he's better at it now because he looks more like a man, because he is. But when he was younger, and you got to remember, this is coming off like Transformers, where he was playing, should we say, to type. But I always thought maybe they were going to go for like make him like a modern day Dreyfus kind of thing, like your non-standard kind of movie hero, and maybe that's what Spielberg would try and do. But I do agree with you, and as I said, I think Shia LaBeouf's a great actor, but he's he's just not Marlon Brando. He's not. I don't buy him as tough, and that's the big issue, which I agree with. But I think the back and forth between Ford and Shia LaBeouf is actually quite strong. I think the chemistry's there, but I totally agree with you. I just don't buy him as tough. I just don't.
No, it's not. But the chase sequence, I will give you that. The chase sequence was great, but it's one of these things as well, isn't it? You said it, and it's going to be a lot with this film, the suspension of disbelief. Like, nobody is questioning these clear Russian agents walking around America.
Like, I guess if they keep them out, and
but not even if they keep their mouth shut, they look Russian.
Yeah, they do. Like, they do look super Russian.
The set jaw, the way they're hiding with their hats.
They do look
at that dude straight away and go, "Fucking hell, dude, you're Russian."
Like, I know, but that sequence, like in the diner. I love that sequence where it's like, hit Joe Cool hard, hit him now. And it's just like when you have like the greasers and the jocks or whatever they are kind of thing. I love all that. And then it goes into the chase. And I love the way he shoots that whole sequence. That's when because obviously everything has that kind of, I mentioned earlier about the bloom, but it actually works in this because he's not doing a 30s serial. He's doing a B movie, which I think is
a 50s B movie.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people had a problem with that in terms of, it just didn't feel right for Indy.
This is exactly what I want to say. I thought we'd get to it, but we'll get to it now.
Yeah,
the fact that it's and I appreciate that it's a 50s B movie, but Steven Spielberg, do your 50s B movie, absolutely, but don't put. It's not Indiana Jones. It's not.
I know.
It's not like Indiana Jones is the guy that he shouldn't. He's hunting treasures of the past, and I appreciate the Crystal Skull now is the past, and it's the conquistadors and all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But the fact then you turn it into aliens. I mean, all you're missing from, I guess, the next film or whatever is going to be time travel. You've got aliens. You've got interdimensional travel,
interdimensional beings in point of fact.
Oh my god!
And that was a big. It's like the pointless semantics of this film, because Spielberg didn't want to do it because he was like, I don't want to do aliens again because I've already done aliens.
Yeah,
it's like, so Spielberg's like, oh no, they're not aliens, they're interdimensional beings, and they well, Oxley obviously delivers that line so kind of straight face. I'm like, oh dude, they're aliens. I don't care if they came from an interdimensional galaxy. They're fucking aliens. They're aliens. It's silly.
This is when I said they did John Hurt dirty, right?
Oh,
because they had him as a bumbling idiot. And then the two lines they give him which stand out is, they're not aliens. And then the other one is, where are they going? Space? Not space. The space between space.
I know, it really was.
That shit.
It doesn't work. And again, I'm not going to say suspension of disbelief, but no, I am. I'm going to say it again. But it's weird that, why can we accept a 507-year-old knight, or a voodoo guy who kind of rips out people's hearts and stuff, but we can't deal with an alien? Because let's be clear, the alien is much more likely. Like, I believe that in aliens, in terms of, like, I'm not saying aliens at our door, but, if you think about the size and scope of the universe, it's almost ludicrous to think that aliens don't exist. So realistically, we're still in a world where we're like, well, aliens probably exist. I'm pretty sure 500-year-old knights don't exist, but it just doesn't feel like a natural fit.
Because it's not.
That's Indy. The problem. Exactly.
Because it's not Indy. We've been through fucking hell, that's a lot of THs. Through 3 films, we've been led to believe this is Indy's shtick.
Yeah, totally.
Indy hunts relics,
artifacts.
He does
often religious artifacts. That's another big part of it.
Yeah, he doesn't go up against interdimensional beings. It just doesn't happen. So it just didn't feel right. Like the 50s look was great, and I will stand up for the film. The way this film looked.
Oh, it looks amazing.
It looked fucking fantastic. The light, the camera angles.
That's what Dial of Destiny is missing again, is that it's not just Spielberg. It's like they don't actually have the same cinematographer for this film, which makes sense because they didn't want it to look like the other indie films. So Janusz Kaminski comes in, and the way he places this movie in the 50s while still retaining that kind of Indiana Jones-ness, I think is spectacular. And it's something that's lacking when you don't have those, like, they've just got that magic. So the film looks brilliant even when it's not brilliant.
Does the Dial of Destiny still have the classic Indiana Jones punch sounds?
Oh yeah. It ticks all the boxes. Yeah, okay. It's not a bad film. As I say, it's just not directed by. If you took Dial of Destiny and I think you add that little bit of Spielberg magic to it, I think it's a genuinely decent film. And it's not a terrible film, but you feel it when you're watching it. Like I said, the action sequences just haven't got that same level of polish that a Spielberg one does. And especially because I watched Dial of Destiny on Tuesday, and then I watched this on Wednesday. And especially, as I said, with the first half being so strong, I was like, man, this is just a better movie. It's just a better movie. And then we got to Brazil and the Amazon. I'm like, oh no, is it a better movie? I was like, man, the second half of this film is fucking rough. And I don't even mind it. Oh, sorry.
The punch sounds sound like you're hitting a bowl full of jelly, doesn't it?
Aliens. They're up there with the Wilhelm scream that you get in every. I mean, it's not just exclusive to Indiana Jones films. It pops up in every film now, seemingly. But there's something specific about an Indiana Jones punch, and it's not just the sound. Again, it's how Harrison Ford throws the punch, and he can still do it in this. Like, again, he looks fantastic for an 8-year-old man. He's playing a 70-year-old man, but we are getting to the point now where you can do as much work as you want. He's an old dude. Whereas, yeah, 65 isn't young when he was filmed, or 64, but fuck me, he looks convincing for most of this film. He like they might, like you said, maybe one or two bits, and it is weird day-to-day stuff, like you mentioned earlier, when he has to climb up boxes, and you can see he's like, fucking hell, this box is high. But everything else, when he's in a fight, I'm like, oh no, he's still Indiana Jones. I think he's brilliant in this film.
Yeah.
But yeah, as I said, the problem in the second half is he gets less and less to do. That's another one of the big.
Well, the second half, the big thing about the second half is it feels like one take, doesn't it? The big thing about action films these days is, we've done a one take action scene. Like you had Extraction, the first one, where it was like a 12-minute chase. Yeah. And then in the second one, we got a bigger one. It's like a 20-minute prison escape scene. And there's a film with Scott Adkins, which I will always argue for Scott Adkins. I love the guy. But there's a film with him actually called One Shot.
Oh, yeah, I know the one, yeah.
It's meant to look like an entire one take, the whole 90-minute. Mm-hmm.
Kind of like they did the same with Birdman, with Michael Keaton. It's not an action film, but they did the same thing. Yeah.
So, and that's what I think it felt like, because we've already gone up against saying Brazil, or you've gone up and said Brazil is probably the worst part of this film. Mm-hmm. And after the tent. But as soon as you get from the tent part, the moment they're in the truck, which is the most of the stuff that you said has happened in Brazil then, is that it all feels like it's just one long action sequence. And it does.
And it feels like it's all tied together.
Yeah. And it's ridiculous. And you get all the bad things that you've said in that then. You get the swinging. You get the fact then that she's driven the car off the bridge. Mm-hmm. And then the fucking... I mean, you had a problem with the gophers, those CGI ants.
Oh, I forgot to mention that. That's bad as well. But even before that, I think the film is still good up until... Because there's the bit when they go to Nazca, Peru, and you can see it's not shot on location at that point. But it's like, I love the cool nod to young Indiana Jones. I think it was specifically an episode called Curse of the Jackal, in which Indy becomes embroiled in the Mexican Revolution and briefly fought alongside Pancho Villa.
Yeah.
Victoriano Huerta. I'm probably murdering the name there. I just love that little nod. I actually like the Nazca Peru scene where he fights off those two little weird, the dead guys who aren't really dead, they're just wearing skull masks.
Do you know who one of those guys was?
No.
Have you ever seen... Oh, you've seen... Turtles 2, haven't you?
Oh, yeah, of course.
Their delivery boyfriend, Ernie Reyes Jr.
That's one of the guys, is it?
Yeah, because he's in Surf Ninjas, and he was he Raphael? He was the suit for Raphael, I think.
Oh, okay.
And then they brought him back for number 2, and they made him a guy. And I love Ernie Reyes Jr., obviously, but yeah, he was one of the Peru guys. Yeah, well, it's just
my point being, is like that scene's not amazing, but the scene when they find Oriana's grave, it's like it still looks the part. It's like, Indiana Jones. Like, I used the quote from the start. It's like, I thought you were a teacher. And it's like part time. I was just like, it still felt like quintessential Indy.
Yeah.
So it's like I'm watching the film, and we get right up to Nazca Peru, and I'm like, fuck, I'm still on board. I'm like, this film's still good. And then, like I said, and I think you've hit the nail on the head there. You get to the Amazon. I think the scene with Indiana Jones, and we've not even mentioned Cate Blanchett yet, where they're talking about the crystal skull and stuff. I actually think there's a lot of great Spielberg stuff. The way that they shoot it on the side, and you can see Indy's silhouette, like kind of his shadow in front of him. I love all that stuff. Even if the crystal skull is inherently quite silly, I think that's the best sequence that Cate Blanchett's in, certainly. And I know she's hit and miss and isn't given enough to do, but I think she's fantastic in that sequence. And we probably have different opinions. I didn't even mind the dry sand bit. And I know the dry sand thing is silly. And I know it was created just to have a scene of Marion and Harrison and Indiana Jones together so they can have that dialogue. And it's just so it wasn't boring. It's just like, we'll have them.
Did you mean quicksand?
Well, didn't they say dry sand? That's the point.
Oh, yeah. I missed that. Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Well, it's dry sand anyway.
Because when you said dry sand, I thought you meant the part where they're at the end and they got to release the sand to make...
Oh, yeah. No. So I'm like right up until this point. I'm still like, this one's good. And then, like you said, I never thought about it that way until you mentioned it. It's not just... It's just relentless. It's just bad, all in a row. And I'm just like, this just looks too CG. I don't think the set piece works. And then when they get to the temple, you have a bunch of guys chasing them. I don't know who those guys are in Akator. There's no explanation for them.
Out of the way, they turn around to like John Hurt and go, Ox, how did you get past them last time?
Yeah.
Like,
fuck knows.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that whole sequence doesn't work, and it's like, yeah, there's like a cool looking temple, but they don't have anything to do. And then the stuff with the alien, I don't think any of that works personally. I think the second half really does fall to pieces, sadly, and it's a shame because, as I said, I think there's half of not just an acceptable Indiana Jones film. I think the first half sits comfortably alongside the original trilogy. I think it's that good, but then I think the second half is that bad, sadly.
I thought as well, trying to shoehorn in the Russian heavy as like their version of Bomber Pat Roach, and Indy's having about 4 or 5 fights with this dude throughout the film. I thought that was pointless as well. Yeah. Like, you just needed a big old fight, and the way they just all of a sudden he gets killed by these ants.
Well, every film has to have their creepy crawlies, I suppose.
No,
but
I get
the ants just don't work.
But yeah, I don't know. They just kept shoehorning because he didn't feel threatening. This dude is tall.
Yeah, he's got enough about him to be like he's the guy in charge. Yeah. But I know what you mean. He doesn't have like a massive physical threat. He's just like a tough Russian, I suppose. Yeah. And that's one of the other major issues is that the bad guys never really land. Like, Cate Blanchett is still Cate Blanchett, and she kind of, when she's on screen, she grabs your attention, but her character isn't really given enough to do.
No,
and then
the rest of it, her ending is pointless. You don't really like. They just call, what did they call her? Stalin's blue-eyed girl or something like that.
Oh yeah. Yeah, and she's like into psychic warfare. All that's kind of swept under the rug. I kind of get the idea that Stalin wants, he thinks because the Americans have nukes that they can win with psychic warfare, and that'll come with this. But it's all slightly underplayed and doesn't quite have the impact that it should.
It's. I love how with films like this, right? When you've got the dictators, like you had Hellboy. Where Hitler had, and they did it in Captain America as well, where Hitler's got he's got his own secret branch. Hitler wants to win the war using supernatural forces and things like that. They always do this when they try and do films like this. Oh yeah. Stalin just doesn't want to do this. He wants to fight on the psychic level as well. Like, where did that come from?
Well, I think what they're trying to do is just ground it in the real world. And it's like, again, the Crystal Skull is a real thing. It's like the whole Crystal Skull thing has been massively debunked. Like, the Crystal Skulls exist, and people who found them, suppose it's like kind of pre-Columbian, Mesoamerican, like art style. But the reality is, when they've actually looked at them closely, they were all created like less than a few hundred years ago, kind of thing. Basically the whole Crystal Skull thing is bollocks. But they've tried to ground it, which most of the films do. And I think they were very wary of it in this film because they're like, fuck, we're going for it with aliens. And that's the problem. They never quite ground it enough. And by the end, when I don't think they should have done the full alien thing. I think when it was just the Crystal Skulls and it was implied, I didn't even actually, I'm going on record say, the scene with the spaceship coming out of the ground, while silly, was visually impressive enough that I'm like, well, that's kind of cool. But the bit before it, where you've got what's her name, Ivanka,
Irana
Spalko, when she's there and the alien, like they spin around and suddenly it actually becomes an alien. I'm just like, they shouldn't have done that. It's just a step too far. And I don't know why Irana explained, because they were like, you brought the skull back, we're going to give you a gift. So was she just too vague in her request? Like, I want to know everything. Like, I was looking this up. I was like, would it kill you? It's theorized that the human brain has a data capacity of 2.5 petabytes, whatever the fuck that means. So it's like, if they went well beyond that, I can imagine her going maybe insane. But would she just explode and disintegrate? I don't know what the fuck that was about.
What happened to her?
It wasn't a very nice gift.
What happened to her? That's the one thing I don't know. Like, did she just disappear, or...
It looked like she disintegrated, because the other guys they looked like they got sucked up into the ship. I'd be interested in what happened to those Russian soldiers. If you want to do like what happened the next day after this film, and the camera just cuts to the Russian soldiers, like, are we on a fucking alien spacecraft? What the fuck, dude? But yeah, I think she just disintegrated, sadly. But
do you know what I said as well?
It was just. Do
you know what you're talking about that part? Do you know I said John Hurt had that stupid space between in spaces line? It was either just before that or just after that. They gave, like, it was 2 terrible lines in a row, pretty much. When Mutt turns around and goes, where was the gold? Oh, no. The whole translation of gold, of treasure, means knowledge. Knowledge was their treasure. Treasure, knowledge. Knowledge was their treasure. Like, he said it about 4 or 5 times.
Yeah.
All right, mate, we get it. It wasn't gold. It was knowledge, and it was too much knowledge. And it's fucking stupid.
Yeah, well, they go, yeah, like you said, there's a few bits of the dialogue later on which go a little bit too far, and sadly, a lot of it falls on John Hurt. He is. I don't want to say he's bad in this film because he's not given much to work with. Like it's like, can you act crazy for ages? And like as you mentioned, then he's given two horrible lines to deliver. Of course, you do it because of Steven Spielberg, because it's an Indiana Jones film, but it's rough going. I heard a lot of people actually complained about the dialogue between Indiana Jones and Marion. I actually thought that stuff was okay. I thought they still.
Well, I mean, they didn't have much to do, did they? They didn't have much to talk about.
It was that's why they had the dry sand sequence for sure.
Yeah, and it just and I get that. Like, I don't think their dialogue was bad between each other, but I don't think there wasn't much for them all of a sudden to rekindle their relationship towards the end.
I thought it was earlier in that film. Again, that whole thing, like you just can't, especially when Indy's in full flow. I actually really like the sequence. I'll get the words wrong here, but she's like, I'm sure when they're talking about like, what you've been doing for the past 20 years, and it's in the mid. That's one of the few things I like about that action sequence. Like, I'm sure there were plenty of women over the years. He's like, yeah, there were a few, but they all had the same problem. Yeah, what's that? They weren't you, honey. And it's just like, it's a cheesy line. But he then immediately jumps on top of the truck and does something amazing. And she's sitting there with like just the most adorable teenage girl grin on her face. Yeah. And you're like, oh yeah, I can totally get that idea that you can try not to love Indiana Jones. But it's like he delivers a line like that, then he immediately jumps on top of a truck, punches a Russian, shoots a grenade, just like, okay, I think I might be in love. And of course, he looks like Harrison fucking Ford. They've
kind of skirted over the date rape angle again, though, haven't they?
From the first film, yeah, that's so weird.
They've kind of forgotten all about the fact that I was a kid or whatever.
I was a child and you knew it. Yeah, it's like, whoa, dude, what the fuck? That line would not be in a modern film.
So they've kind of skirted over. So Shia LaBeouf is like, wait, you're only 10 years older than me. Like,
it's a little bit suspect, but
in regards to that sequence, right, where because they all know Indy is dangerous. The Russians have already hinted at it. They've always got guns pointed on him.
Yeah.
Would you keep a rocket launcher in the same truck that Indy's in?
No, it's silly. It just wouldn't be in there. Yeah. It's like, it all gets a little bit Dr. Evil at that point. It's like, well, why didn't you just shoot him? No, Scott. We're just going to put him in an easily escapable situation in front of an idiot guard. It's like, It's one of those. It's like, come on, guys. Just kill him. And it happens in every movie. But now, by this point, you're like, listen, we all know who Indiana Jones is. You clearly know who Indiana Jones is. How about you just put a bullet in him and just try and figure out on your own? You'll be fine. No.
So they put him in the back of the truck. Right, you sit there. Indiana Jones, you sit there. Yeah, on top of the crate labeled rocket launchers. Just sit there. You're fine. Okay? Yeah.
Don't touch him. No. Don't touch the rocket. Oh, no, I won't. That's okay. You definitely won't touch the rocket? No. Okay, we'll be fine. Are you sure you want to put him in there? Oh, he said he wouldn't touch him. No problem at all.
Promise, if you try to escape, you won't shoot us with the rocket launcher. Yeah. Fingers crossed.
Yeah. I mean, don't escape. But if you do escape, promise me, don't cross those fingers, promise me you won't shoot us with a rocket launcher. All right, fair enough. If I escape, and I won't escape, but I will escape, I won't shoot you with a rocket launcher. But I will.
And the other thing, right? Why did that weird boat car thing that they were driving have 7 rapiers in a case?
I guess she just carried her rapiers. She just liked rapiers. They were all, I keep getting the name wrong, Iranas. Yeah, she didn't need to have a whole box full of rapiers. I think one would be plenty. But of course, you need to have that, fencing scene with them. And that fencing scene just looks rough. As I said, like going through the movie,
I like a good sword fight.
I don't have any issue with the concept of the sword fight. I just think it looks too CG heavy, and I think it comes back again. If Spielberg was willing to go on location, it didn't have to be the Amazon, but if he was willing to go to a jungle and put them in a situation where they're actually standing on the trucks and in a real location and shoot things like they did back in the 80s and 90s, whatever, I think that sequence could have worked. But because it's so CG heavy and the CG just isn't there, and let's be clear, it's not there today. It still wouldn't look great if you did the same sequence today because we know it's CG and they're not actually on location. And I think that's the massive issue. And like I said, it doesn't help that straight after that you get him swinging from the trees. I get it. It's an homage to Tarzan. It doesn't work. But the big issue, I think, is actually Marion just driving off the cliff. I know what I'm doing. This truck, if I drive off, the branch is going to take one. How the fuck does she know the branch is there? The idea that it would just take their weight and put them in the water. It's just bad. It's badly written. It's badly put together. I don't like it.
I love how the vines just led him to where they were.
Yeah, totally.
Like,
it's silly. And all the monkeys are there. They're like showing him the way. I'm like, come on, give me a fucking break.
The monkeys would rip his face off in real life, wouldn't they? They wouldn't. Like...
Yeah, see, you all go after the fucking fridge sequence. That sequence is so much worse. It's so much worse. I'm going to go on record, and if it wasn't clear, I'm just not accepting of the fridge sequence. This is my hot take for the film, because I don't think it's as hot a take nowadays to say that the first half of this film is good. As I said, I think people have moved on from the dramatic response to this film. Oh, it's the worst, blah, blah, blah. I think people probably look at the first half and go, this is largely pretty good. My hot take is the nuke, the fridge scene is actually good. The whole sequence is good. Yes, it takes a suspension of disbelief, which some aren't willing to do, but I think that sequence is good.
Our tagline for this film is Indiana Jones, Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, suspension of disbelief.
Yeah, I think it will be.
Yeah.
I think it will be. Do we have anything else to cover? Because, I mean, the second half, we've kind of flown through, but we both agree the second half's a bit shit, and the aliens don't work, so it is what it is. I know you get Marion and Indy married at the end, and they hinted that it was going to end up with Shia LaBeouf, carrying the torch. That obviously didn't work out. But as I said, I think Shia LaBeouf is a good actor. I just don't think he's good in this. And it was a bit of a folly, kind of trying to make him the next Brando. I don't know what they were thinking.
I will go on record and say I'm all right with them redoing Indiana Jones with another actor.
Oh,
no, I'm all right. Like I like Harrison Ford. I love the original trilogy, as we've already said. But I do like an archaeologist, like one of these type of films. I love these kind of stories. So I'd be more. I liked the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles with Sean Patrick Flannery.
Yeah, though I feel like that's different though because he's younger. If you wanted to, right, that's a good point actually. If you're going to keep doing the Indiana Jones thing, and you did like a proper young Indiana Jones, I could get on board with that. If it's a different actor playing a younger version of Harrison Ford, I can get on board with that. I just don't want 40-something actor, the obvious one I don't about is that I don't want Chris Pratt. And that's nothing against Chris Pratt. I know people jump on him. I think Chris Pratt's perfectly good. I don't want anyone playing 45-year-old Indiana Jones. I just don't want it.
No, but you need a young enough actor to, if it works, and the problem is it's not going to work because you've got a lot of people who can't suspend disbelief.
Yeah.
And oh, no, he's not my Indiana. Do you know? But people are willing to expect.
I think if they could
9,000 fucking James Bonds.
Well, the James Bond thing's different because the precedent was set early doors that he could be played by different actors. So I think everyone's just kind of accepted that Indiana Jones is Harrison Ford when he's basically, how old was he when he did Raiders of the Lost Ark? Late 30s.
Yeah.
So it's just like from that point onwards, it's like it's Indiana Jones. But if you did, people were accepting of. I mean, it helped that Indiana Jones was still Harrison Ford in that movie. But River Phoenix in The Last Crusade, I think everyone kind of agreed. It's like, oh, he would have made a good young Indiana Jones. And I wouldn't have been surprised if he had lived that they might have done that. But realistically, the only way they can bring Indiana Jones back, is if they bring him back as, say, a 15, 20-year-old. And that's it. Because you can't let him get into his 30s because then you're in Harrison Ford territory. But between 15 and 25... you get the right actor, I think you can do that. And I'd be on board with it. Like I said, just don't try and sell me on the idea of...
I don't want Indiana Jones things, Indiana Jones films, where it's like, the torch has been passed. Because it was hinted at Mutt Williams, his name might actually be Indiana, blah, blah, blah. So that's how they would go on, but obviously it didn't work. Now you've got Phoebe Waller-Bridge, or maybe they're passing the torch to her. I haven't seen the film, so I'm not too sure.
I don't think they're doing that.
But that's what
I know what you mean.
They released the film, and you don't need passing of the torch. Just get a young enough actor, a decent story, and start Indiana Jones. It's not going to take any away from the originals. They're still the original.
They still exist. No,
they're still great. They still exist.
Yeah.
But this is for a newer audience.
Well, that's what I think is the important bit, is they have to sell you on the idea, and you have to believe that, say you bring in a new actor, say 16, 17 years old, say, oh, he's Indiana Jones, but you're all saying, but this kid grows up to be Harrison Ford. Like, in the future, he becomes Harrison Ford. He's not replacing Harrison Ford. This is just Harrison Ford when he was 50. In the same way as we mentioned with River Phoenix. River Phoenix was playing Indiana Jones, but it was with the proviso that it's like, well, when he grew up, he became Harrison Ford. And as long as you do that, I think people would be a lot more accepting of the idea. Just don't give me, like you said, I don't want to pass on the torch from the character, and I don't want anyone else playing mid-40s, 50s, whatever, Indiana Jones. But a young Indy, maybe. We'll see. Should we move on to favorite scene?
Yeah, go for it.
I mean, for me, it's probably the opening sequence at the hangar. But I mean, I'm not gonna lie, and I'm not just doing this to get a rise. I legitimately do like the nuke the fridge sequence.
Yeah.
I genuinely.
I knew that was going to be your scene.
I'm going to speak out. I have to bring it up because I'm speaking out in defense of it. I love everything about that sequence except for the fact that the fridge flying through the air and landing is a bit silly. So because of that, I'm going to make it the opening sequence in the hangar because I still think that's classic Indy. And you got to remember back in 2008, we all had this like, fuck, can Harrison Ford still do this at 64? He convinces you pretty quickly. It's like, oh, he's still got the magic. So yeah, I'm going to go with the hangar sequence.
It's the same with me. From the silhouette of Indy where he puts the hat on, because I always remember seeing that.
I love that sequence. That was actually that wasn't part of the shooting scene. Like basically Spielberg just saw his reflection on the car. His
silhouette.
Yes,
silhouette, shadow.
Geez, sorry, his shadow on the car and went, "Oh, that's awesome." So just kind of did it in the moment.
You had an issue with Shadow, but I got shit for forgetting who Sean Connery was.
I know. We all have our moments. It's fine. This is what happens when you don't edit a podcast.
I love that, and I still remember watching it in the cinema. I would have been 25 when this came out, so watching that as a 25-year-old man who loved Indiana Jones as a kid. So it just seeing that again. And it set me up because then, this film's going to be fantastic. And then you walk out of the film deflated. But before that, I said the opening sequence is still my Indiana at that point.
Yeah.
So I loved it. And it will always be my favorite scene of this film, the beginning.
Mm-hmm. No, totally agree. In terms of loves, I mentioned earlier Spielberg's direction, especially after watching the James Mangold take on it. The day before, you really do appreciate just how talented Spielberg is. I know that sounds ridiculous, we all know, but you really see, like you said, Mangold is good. Just not Spielberg, and there's a reason because Spielberg is rarefied air. It's like, I'm using a football example here, won't work on you, but it's like, you've been a really good footballer, but being brought in to replace Lionel Messi. It's like, it's not your fault that, the guy you're replacing is one of the greatest of all time.
Yeah.
And that's the thing with Spielberg, and you see enough here to remind you, it's like, oh yeah, Spielberg, he's got the magic still. Number two, the cinematography from Janusz Kaminski, as I mentioned earlier, it places the movie in the 50s, it gives it a unique look, but it's still fucking Indiana Jones. I think that's fantastic. And Harrison Ford just still slaying his Indy. He just looks great. We all had it seems ridiculous now because of course he's playing Indiana Jones. I think he was 79 when he shot the movie. We were like, oh, can he do this at 64? We had our concerns back in 2008, but he is totally convincing. And whatever kind of issues you might have with this movie, and there are a lot of issues, like I don't think anyone had any issue with Harrison Ford's performance. He is all in on this. He still feels like Indy. Harrison Ford has given a few somewhat half-assed performances when he's not committed in the past to other films, but when he's Indy, man, he's all in, and he's fantastic in this movie.
Yeah, so for me, straight away, Harrison Ford, I think he does what he does with this film. I haven't got an issue with Harrison Ford as Indiana Jones in this film.
Yeah.
I think he's great, and like I said, at 64, he's still bringing that Indiana Jones magic. So I've got no problem with that. The way it looks 50s. Mm-hmm. I think it's absolutely great. It looks fantastic as a 50s film. It's so bright. It's so B movie. It's ridiculous.
Yeah.
And the third one for me is actually the ending of the bike chase in the college.
Oh, Marshall College, yeah, it's great.
When they go under the tables, they push the guy out, and the kid just goes, "Professor, I have a question." I laughed.
Oh, that's awesome. No, it's as I said, that whole sequence is amazing, and that bit again, practical effects because you see Harrison Ford is on that fucking bike, and yes, they cut to like a stunt double, but there's no CG there, and it's just so much better. In terms of hates, I obviously pick a few here. Number one is the sword fight. Number two, swinging from the trees. And number three is driving off the cliff with confidence. I just hate that sequence. A close number four is, as much as I wanted to convince myself, like, why are aliens sillier than what happens in the first three? It just is. It just doesn't work because it just doesn't feel quite like Indiana Jones. So I'm going to stick in number four. I'm never quite convinced by the whole alien thing. But my big issue is just the Amazon sequence.
Yeah, no, I get that. Number one is the fridge. Obviously, I mean, I've already established that that fridge door will never stay shut. So
yeah, fair enough.
The film would have ended there.
And Rob knows his fridges, man. He knows it. He has moved some fucking fridges.
I'm not too sure I know my lead-lined fridges. Maybe that's what the issue was. But
maybe it's like those 50s fridge. I mean, I've got like a Smeg fridge, which looks a little bit like a 50s fridge. Opening that door sometimes can be a massive pain in the ass. It just kind of sticks. Yeah. So maybe I'm willing to go with it a bit more because I've got that kind of fridge.
Next time there's a nuclear holocaust, right? You hide in your fridge and let me know.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure if it's lead lined. Which, let's be clear, I think is the problem for everyone else. But yeah, the door not opening, of course, fair enough.
Yeah. So that number 2 for me is how dirty they did John Hurt.
Yeah,
I get it. Pointless in it. It didn't. And I'm going to give you some of the CGI in the third, and obviously the gophers in the first part. But those fucking ants and the monkeys and things like that. Yeah, the CG overall kind of hurt this film a lot.
It does, and as I say, as soon as they moved off site and put a greater emphasis on CG, and make no mistake, for all my positive twist on this film, I had no problems filling up the hate section, and I think maybe it makes it so much more disappointing because I think there's a good film in here. They just kind of shit the bed in the second half.
Oh, and number 4, Aliens. It's not my Indiana Jones. Aliens is not my Indiana Jones. It's not my Indiana Jones adventure. It's just stupid.
No, it feels as maybe I'm not as negative on it as you, and I think they did a relatively good job of kind of grounding it, but it just never feels quite right to me. It just feels a little bit off. In terms of alternative titles, I'm not sure if there are any in terms of globally, but there were a few working titles while the final script was still in development. So there was City of Gods, which I thought was okay, or City of the Gods. There was The Atomic Ants. That was a real title for a bit. And there was The Destroyer of Worlds, which is actually referenced in the movie. So this film did have quite a few titles based on the initial scripts before they settled on Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. But I'll be amazed if there were any actual alternate titles.
No, there weren't really. I mean, you just had like Indiana Jones 4.
Yeah, fair
but
enough.
You didn't actually get no. It was just Crystal Skull pretty much all throughout. I went through quite a lot of the alternative titles and the countries and stuff, and translating them to English. And I gave up after a while because they were just all pretty much Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. So
you do get it with these big tentpole films. They very rarely shift them about. The only one I can think of is like. They famously did it for Harry Potter, didn't they? Where they didn't have the Philosopher's Stone because they didn't think Americans would know what a Philosopher's Stone was. Okay, brilliant.
Yeah, so they did Sorcerers, didn't they?
Sorcerer's Stone, yeah.
But hopefully, we with next week's film and so on, we can get some alternate titles because they're fun. Alternate titles.
Okay, I look forward to it. Yeah. Any facts for this one?
Yeah, we got a few. I don't know if you've got any to start or you just want.
No, go for it.
Yeah. So Harrison Ford was adamant that he got to wield Indiana's whip. Paramount executives wanted the weapon to be CG because of the new movie safety rules, but Ford branded the rule ridiculous. Can you imagine if it was a CG whip as well?
Oh, so bad. So bad. You can, even today, like with the CG, you can just tell. Just put it in the hand. It was like, Catwoman in Batman Returns.
Yeah.
Like, she worked a lot, Michelle Pfeiffer, to get that right. The famous scene where she takes all the heads off the mannequins.
Yeah.
You can see that being done in real time. There's like a cool behind the scenes thing.
I was saying, have you seen the behind the scenes where everyone just started applauding her?
Oh, dude, because it's fucking badass, and it's Michelle Pfeiffer dressed as Catwoman doing it. You're like, Jesus Christ, did I just fall in fucking love? I think I might have. But yeah, if they'd given Harrison Ford a CG whip, it would have been an absolute disgrace.
In regards to Harrison Ford's classic always getting injured on set, right?
Mm-hmm.
It might have got a bit worse. When filming the scene where Indiana drives a truck through a wall, things did not go as planned. Timed explosives were used, but one explosive did not go off and landed in the seat next to Harrison Ford.
Jesus Christ. It's not quite Tom Cruise, but I mean, he's doing his stunts in these films. He is going for it.
Harrison Ford died today because an explosive landed next to him.
Yeah, I mean, what the fuck? But he does get injured on all these films, apparently.
Several weeks into production, Harrison Ford saw a blonde woman on set and asked who she was. He was told it was Cate Blanchett, who he had never seen out of costume and did not recognize her without her wig.
That's crazy.
Yeah. Cate Blanchett and Harrison Ford never met before the movie. The first time they were introduced was on the first day of filming, where Indiana and Spalko first met. Blanchett said it was ideal to be introduced to him dressed as Indiana Jones because she'd always been a big fan of the character. Karen Allen was not aware the character was in the script until Steven Spielberg called her in January 2007 saying, "It's been announced, we're going to make Indiana Jones 4, and guess what? You're in it again." Karen greeted Spielberg about the same way Marion greeted Indiana back in Nepal and Tibet, given a notorious problematic relationship.
Fair enough.
Yeah, they weren't fans of each other, were they?
Well, it's strange, isn't it? It's like, only Spielberg can get away. He doesn't ask you to be in his film. He's just like, oh, you're in the film. Like, you're not going to say no to Indiana Jones.
Yeah.
It's like, fair enough.
Sean Connery was approached for a cameo appearance as Henry Jones Sr., but he turned it down, finding retirement too enjoyable. George Lucas later stated that in retrospect, it was good that Jones Sr. did not appear, as it would disappoint the audience when he would not come along for the adventure.
Yeah,
Harrison Ford also joked that he was getting old enough to play his own father, so Sean wasn't needed anymore.
Yeah, and I think you had that great line, that that bit of pathos earlier in the film, where it's like, when they're talking about like losing Adrian Brody and Henry Jones Sr. in the space of a few years, and it's like, oh, we're at that point of our lives where life stops giving and starts taking away, and it's just like, I just thought a cool little moment. They hint at like Indy's age, and I thought that was a great moment. But and I think he even said, like, specifically, he's like, I don't want to dye my hair for this. I don't want people to feel weird. I want people to know that I'm old, but I can still do this. And they have a few jokes about his age, especially with Shia LaBeouf calling him Gramps and stuff. But it never feels forced. There's never too much of this too old for this shit nonsense. They get the tone just about right there.
Which makes me laugh. Like when we joked, what was it, Lethal Weapon? I'm too old for this shit at 50 or 45, wherever he was. Yeah.
Oh, he was younger than I am now.
Yeah.
Like Danny Glover, he was playing. I think he was doing the opposite of Harrison Ford. I think he was playing 50, but I'm pretty sure Danny Glover was like 39, 40 years old at the start of Lethal Weapon. I'm like, fuck, man. I'm like 2 years older. I'm officially too old for this shit. Fuck.
This is a bit meta. The girl who punches Mutt Williams in the diner scene is Sasha Spielberg. She's the daughter of Steven Spielberg and Kate Capshaw, who played Willie Scott in Temple of Doom.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
That's a cool little meta thing.
What else have we got here? The nuclear bomb test that Indiana Jones finds himself in is loosely based on the Operation Teapot atomic bomb test of 1955, detonated on a Nevada test site. Most notable is the use of buildings and mannequins to observe the destructive force of the explosion, which was also featured in the nuclear bomb test in the movie. The announcements and countdown preceding the explosion are based on the Ivy Mike test of 1952, the very first detonation of a hydrogen bomb. Most notably, the warning, do not remove goggles or face blast until 10 seconds after first light.
Yeah, it's amazing. The more I think about it, the more I like that scene. Like when he's like running around the town, he realizes where he is, and the camera does this amazing like zoom out, and then it goes in like behind the bomb about to be dropped. I just love it. See, now I'm getting even more positive about that sequence. I love that sequence. It's one of my favorite sequences.
The movie was delivered to theaters with a combination lock. The combination wasn't provided until the day of the first showing. Code names for the movie were Bandwagon and Turbo.
Oh, crazy.
Yeah. Character of Mutt Williams is named after composer John Williams.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
That was pretty obvious, I think.
I've got one to sneak in here. I'm not sure if it's an interesting one, but I wonder how people look back on this film, because I know the internet got hold of this film, but it's easy to forget that this movie was actually reviewed pretty well back in 2008. Like, you go back and look at, like, it's fresh on Rotten Tomatoes. It's got decent scores. It was only when the internet got hold of it that it got a bad reputation. I don't think anyone really thought it was up to like the original trilogy, but the reviews for this were not just not bad, they were positive. They were certainly better than they have been for the Dial of Destiny. And on top of that, if you adjust the box office for inflation, this isn't far behind Raiders or Crusade in terms of how much it made. I think it's actually ahead of Temple of Doom, but they all made in and around $1 billion basically by today's money. But this film was like a massive hit, and critically it was quite positively received as well. I just thought it was a surprise going back to it that you look at the reviews and go, most people like this until the internet got hold and the whole nuke the fridge thing. And then, as I said, it becomes a narrative, doesn't it?
No, I think as well, mind, the reason, the review part, but the money part is everyone just went in for.
Well, yeah, it was just like, oh, it's Indiana Jones, isn't it, kind of thing. But I thought maybe I knew it had done well. I make no mistake, but I thought maybe the bad initial reaction to this from fans and all the internet kerfuddle, I thought maybe it would have taken the edge off, and it didn't have the legs. Like, if you told me this film had made like 600 million, I would have believed you. Like, again, adjusted for inflation, I think at the time it did 700 million. But based on today's money, if this had done like 6, I would have been like, yeah, that sounds about right. But no, it was right up there with Raiders and Last Crusade, and actually, as I said, ahead of Temple of Doom.
Only 2 more from me, and then we can move on. The only Indiana Jones film where he doesn't fire his gun. That may now not be the case. I don't know if he fires a gun in Dial of Destiny, but and then
He does. I'm pretty sure he does fire numerous guns. Yeah.
Okay, this may not be the case again because I haven't seen Dawn of Destiny, but this is the only Indiana Jones movie to be set entirely in the Western Hemisphere.
Yeah. I see what you mean.
Yeah. So, that's it for me.
Fair enough. In terms of legacy, I mentioned earlier, it has that digital gleam that was pervasive at the time, and especially so in the naughty Spielberg movies. But again, mentioned earlier, that recent 4K transition has turned all that down. So if you're watching it on Disney Plus, that is the updated version of this, and it makes it a much more visually palatable movie. It never looked ugly. I just think it actually looks better now. Shot everything in New York because he wants to be with his family, which is fair enough, but the movie suffers from that real location work. I think that was a major issue with the film. Yeah. It was definitely the most maligned of the series, but I still think quite harshly so. I mentioned I actually might prefer this to Dawn of Destiny just because of the whole Spielbergian aspect of it. I think the reason for that is, like I mentioned earlier, this is a better movie, but it has a worse screenplay, and you really feel that in the second half. In terms of legacy, you can't see beyond the nuke the fridge. I've spoken out in support of it, but I think most people, when they think of this film, they immediately go to the nuking of the fridge. And that saying has kind of, I don't think it'll ever quite replace jumping the shark, but it became a thing, didn't it? It's like, this is a movie going too far. I think it should have been swinging on the vine or fencing in the jungle, but it is what it is. And you can make an argument that whatever you or I might feel about Shia LaBeouf, it kind of started that downward spiral for Shia LaBeouf, where he started to go, I'm not sure if he ever quite recovered from the reaction to this film, because he went pretty mental for a few years, and he's still done some interesting films. And as I said, I think he's a very good actor who was miscast rather than a bad actor. But I'm just not sure if he ever quite recovered from this, because he went fucking mental for a few years. Didn't he?
Yeah.
Not quite Charlie Sheen mental, but pretty fucking mental. In terms of score and soundtrack, unsurprisingly, another exceptional score from John Williams, still recognizably indie, but subtly implements like a B-movie twist. You see that like right at the start of the film. As soon as you see the Crystal Skull in particular, it really goes proper sci-fi, the score, but then, brings it back to indie before it gets too silly. But the other thing this film also adds is a good soundtrack. Plenty of 50s bangers, but the first song is the one that really leaves a mark. Hound Dog by Elvis. It's very on the nose, but it's super effective. I don't care what anyone says. In terms of video games, we already did this a few weeks ago when we covered last week.
See my answer for them.
But yeah, there are plenty of Indiana Jones games. Many of them aren't all that great, but I did love the OG Xbox game, The Emperor's Tomb by the Collective. I thought that was fantastic. Very much a Tomb Raider ripoff, Snake eating its own tail situation. There was actually a Crystal Skull video game, but it was a mobile one, which has invariably been lost to the sands of time, like so many were. But in terms of if we're going to get an Indiana Jones game today, yes, Machine Games are making Indiana Jones games. That's gone MIA. But of course, who are we going to pick? It's Naughty Dog. 100%. But to repeat what I said on that podcast, if you don't go the young indie way, if you're going to keep Indiana Jones going, video games is the answer. Because you can still do Harrison Ford voicing but you have to do Harrison Ford. It has to be big budget, Harrison Ford voicing the character, and then you just modulate it to make him sound a bit younger. I think that's the alternative to the future of the series if you're not doing the young indie version. But yes, Machine Games, I'm sure, will do a fine job, but we all want Naughty Dog doing it, don't we?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, this is the interesting bit: scores and recommendations. So, for me, I would recommend with a caveat, as I mentioned earlier. I think the first half is legitimately fantastic. That sounds strong, but I do feel like going back and rewatching it. More so than I did in the past. I think the first half of this film is brilliant, but the second half is even worse than I remember. So I would just about recommend it with a caveat. And in terms of score, I'm going to give it a 3-star. I think the highs inching towards 5 stars at times because it does have that Spielberg magic. But the second half is like 2 stars. It's a 2-star movie from Brazil onwards. So I have to settle it at a 3. It's a strong 3 for me. I've always enjoyed watching this film and I enjoyed rewatching it. But it's hard to take the second half because it really does drop off a cliff, sadly.
For me, I probably wouldn't recommend it. There's better Indiana Jones films to recommend.
Oh yeah. I'm not recommending they watch this over Raiders of the Lost fucking Ark. I'm just saying if you've seen the original 3, I know a lot of people. The whole saying became for a long time. Oh, there's 3 Indiana Jones films. That was a joke for ages. People wouldn't mention the fact that there was a 4th one. They wouldn't. I would say, if you enjoy Indiana Jones, I would say watch this one. Just be aware that it goes off the rails in the second half. But there's still enough here for it to work. And compared to a lot of modern blockbusters, I would still take fucking Kingdom of the Crystal Skull with its faults.
No, I probably wouldn't recommend it. And it's such a middle of the road film that it's a middle of the road score. It's 2.5, dude. It is literally.
No, I get that. I get that. I would legitimately say 3. So if I was scoring out of 10, I would say a 6 because I'm more positive on, the stuff that works, I think really works, but there's no escaping the fact that the bad stuff is bad. So yeah. I'm settling on like a proper solid 3, but I totally get 2.5. And I'm glad you said that because I was worried you were going to come in and just be like, oh, this film's shit, because I just don't think it is. And I think that's the mindset for a lot of people, that this is some kind of travesty of a movie. And it just isn't. There's loads of the good stuff in this is better than most movies because it's Spielberg. Harrison Ford. When this film is great, it really sings. It's just so disappointing when it doesn't.
Don't get me wrong. I probably would never have gone back to this film if it wasn't for the podcast.
I get that. I get that.
I'd watch number 3 and probably wouldn't watch this again. But, it's a 2.5. It's middle of the road. It's probably not one I'll watch again unless I'm forced to.
But it's one of those odd ones. I think it's just, if this comes on TV, and this is how I've seen it so many times, if like I said, if it's the Amazon sequence, I'm turning it over. Yeah. But if the film just starts, or if it's at Marshall College, any of those sequences, I'm like, I'm watching the rest of this sequence. This sequence is a banger. Yeah. The open, if I just come into a room and it's literally Indiana Jones rocking up at the warehouse, I'm like, well, I'm watching this until they get to Peru. Yeah, at least. But yeah. So we're surprisingly close. I'm a little bit more positive on it, but yeah, the second half is rough. So yes, that has been Indiana Jones and Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. Next week, though, something a little less, I don't know.
We've had a bad.
It feels like we've had divisive. Empire Strikes Back, I didn't think was divisive, but it turned out to be divisive. We've disagreed a lot, although we agreed on this more than I thought we would.
Yeah. But we've had a bad few weeks where people seem to. We've had people question on our social medias going, "Are you two okay?"
Yeah, mummy and daddy arguing again. Is this fine? We're just having a chat.
I figured we'd keep the arguments up. But then I thought, you know what? No, I'm going to save Hudson Hawk for a couple of weeks.
Oh, Jesus, you can't go straight into Hudson Hawk. That would be, that would be divorce material.
Yeah, Hudson. I remember loving Hudson Hawk but hating Empire Strikes Back.
You're a fucking lunatic, mate. And I don't care. I know some people are like, oh, the nuke the fridge guy's giving Rob shit. Go fuck yourself. You like Hudson Hawk, but you hate Empire Strikes Back. Give me a break. Don't get me wrong. I'm actually, obviously, you're setting this up. We're doing Hudson Hawk at some point. I'm genuinely looking forward to doing Hudson Hawk because I saw it once, thought it was shit, haven't watched it since. So that was like, what? When was it even released? 94, 95, something like that?
Early 90s, yeah, maybe 92.
Oh, it might have been that early. So I'm actually looking forward to going back and giving it a second chance. But yeah, maybe it's not the one we do next. So
no, I think we'll give ourselves a break. So a couple of weeks ago, we did 91 Hudson Hawk.
Oh, Jesus, that is earlier than I thought.
Yeah. We did quite a few action films a couple of weeks ago. We did the Nicolas Cage trilogy.
Yeah.
And after watching Face Off, the John Woo film, and it had John Travolta in, I've really been, I want to say jonesing to go back and do Broken Arrow. So I think we're going to do Broken Arrow.
Yeah, I think that'll be a fun one. Again, a film I remember enjoying. I like the cast. It's obviously Pete John Woo and stuff, but I've not seen this film since 95 when it was released. Is that right?
Yeah, 95, 96, I think. So it was, okay. I think it might have been the follow-up after, it would have been that close. After Travolta's return in Pulp Fiction, because Pulp Fiction was 94.
That was 94, yeah. So it was between that and Face Off, so it must have been 95, 96 for sure.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've not seen this film since. I have fond memories of it, but those memories are fading, to say the least. So it's like, it'll almost be like watching it again for the first time. So I'm looking forward to this one. Yeah. And I suspect we might agree on this a little more than we did.
I think we will. I think there'll be scenes, obviously, again, I think it'll be part of... There's a nuclear explosion in this one as well, isn't it? Where you yeah. So we'll have to.
Yeah, it'll be interesting as a comparison. But yeah, no, I think it's going to be a good one. But like I said, thank you for joining us for Kingdom of Crystal Skull. And bizarre, it's always weird when I think of the films we jump between. But please do join us next week for Broken Arrow. But thanks for listening as always, guys.
We absolutely have no order in the way we do.
Oh, none whatsoever. It's like, what do I fancy rewatching this week? That's about it.
Absolutely. So, at one point, when I can find a way of getting Garbage Kids to you. Garbage
Oh,
Pail
Jesus
Kids.
Christ.
We're going to be doing it.
I saw somebody at the airport wearing one of those fucking t-shirts. I was like, Jesus Christ. I was like,
Well,
I'm going to end up watching that film at some point. It's going to be so sad.
I'm looking at the DVD, and the only way I'm thinking about how you're going to see it, unless you come down or I come to you at some point, is I'm going to have to mail it to you.
Yeah, you might have to. I'm not
Like
buying
some-
Garbage Pail Kids.
Like
You
some
can go
weird
fuck yourself.
loverob.com.
Yeah, it's just not happening. Not happening. Well, let's deal with Broken Arrow first. We said we don't want any more arguments. So, yes, that should be good fun, I hope. But,
Right,
yeah,
cheers,
join
guys.
us next week.
Catch
Cheers,
us next
guys.
week for
Catch
Broken
up.
Arrow. And, yeah, take it easy.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye now.
Oh, and before we forget, here is Rob with all the finer details. Got to get through those, dude.
Yeah, so basically you can find us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at HeyYouGuys80s. We're also on email at HeyYouGuys80s@gmail.com. Please feel free to drop us any recommendations, any corrections or omissions we may have missed from any of the films that we've covered. Just get them in. And also, if you could, please leave us some 5-star reviews. That would really help us. And we'd like to thank, as always, Darry Fletcher at Darry Doodles for the fantastic artwork that we're now producing. Thanks for that, mate.
Cheers, Derry.
Yeah. And thanks again for listening, and we will see you next week.
Cheers. Bye.
Hey, you go!